Hi, Phoebe. Thank you so much for joining us today at the writing room.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here.
No worries. Can we just jump right in with the first question? Please, can you introduce yourself and give us a brief overview of your current work role?
Of course. So my name is Phoebe Morgan. I work as an editorial director at HarperCollins in London, and I specialise in crime and thriller. So my remit is to acquire new crime and thriller novels for the business and to publish them through the process. I also write myself, so I'm also an author of 4 thrillers. So I've sort of seen the publishing process from both sides of the fence, which hopefully gives me an interesting perspective on it.
Yeah, definitely. I think that'd be really useful. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the projects you've overseen since becoming editorial director?
Yeah, of course. So I've worked in publishing for a while now, I think it's about 9 years. And I became editorial director a few years ago. As I said, I specialize now in crime and thriller. But before that, I worked in commercial fiction in general. So I did some women's fiction, some saga, historical, romance. But it was crime and thriller that always attracted me the most. So in the last couple of years, I've been working closely with a list of about 15 different authors. The couple of books I've published in the last few years, I published a book called Girl A by Abigail Dean, which was her debut, which came out in lockdown, which was obviously a challenge, but has actually done really, really well. So that's been really exciting to be a part of. I published an author called Catherine Cooper, who had a book called The Chalet, which hit number 5 on the Sunday Times list. So again, that was published in like November 2020, which was a really difficult time, but it was really good to see it cutting through. Just recently, I've published a book called All Good People Here by Ashley Flowers, who is actually the host of a really popular crime podcast called Crime Junkie, which people that are on this page might be interested in because the podcast is incredible. And it's her first book, and that's just got in at number 1 on the New York Times bestsellers list in America. So that's been really exciting. So yeah, sort of a range really, but the main part of my job is working with these authors really from start to finish. So I will read their manuscripts when they come in from literary agents on submission, and then I'll, if I want to do a deal, I will hopefully buy the book, and then I'll work really closely with them editorially to just sort of hone the novel. Sometimes we make quite big changes, sometimes we make sort of very small detail changes, and then in the sort of the months that go by, I then also brief the cover for the book, and I work with the marketing and design and the publicity teams to really champion the book. And I think that's really the main part of an editor's job, is to be that champion for your authors. And I think sometimes people don't realize like how many people it goes, how many people are needed to make a book. Like there's so many people involved, but the editor is the one that's kind of holding it together and being that point of contact for the author. So for me, my authors are sort of the core of everything we do, and they're the most important part of the business, really.
Yeah, oh, that's amazing. Thank you. That was really comprehensive view. What kinds of submissions would you say you're seeing the most at the moment? And what would you like to see more of? Personally, I know this is subjective.
Yeah, it is subjective, and I think that's also worth just talking about briefly, because I think as if you're an author and you're trying to get a deal, or maybe you're changing publishers, you do sometimes face rejection, which is a really hard part of being a writer. But the thing I would say to that is that it is so subjective. Like I have definitely, as an editor, turned down books that are actually great and there's nothing wrong with them per se, but for me, they're just not quite right for my list. And I think that term, like not right for the list, can be so frustrating to hear, but sometimes it really is true. So for example, I turned down a book because it was really similar to a novel that I already had. So I didn't want to cannibalize the existing author. And sometimes I like it, but I don't love it. And to be the editor, you have to really, really love it, because you have to champion that book for sometimes, years, and really for the rest of your career. You still want to feel connected to that novel. And we do have only a limited number of titles that we can take on per year. But in terms of what I'm seeing at the moment, in crime and thriller, there's definitely more books that are touching on climate change, and the sort of world crisis, I suppose, that we're seeing. I personally find those quite hard to read because they scare me.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of them. So there's more dystopian novels, sort of futuristic novels set in Australia with sort of the bushfires, novels set in a world which is maybe a little bit in the future, where things that it's sort of our world but sort of heightened, and a lot of that is around environmental issues. So I think in crime and thriller, that's coming through a lot, and I suppose it lends itself quite well to a thriller, because if you take climate change to its extreme, it can be a sort of isolating experience, it can be a really dangerous experience. So I can see why authors are doing that, but I personally haven't bought anything in that space recently because as I said, I find it quite tough. I just bought a big thriller called Anna O, which is by an author called MJ Blake, which is a very high concept novel. So it's about a woman who stabs two people in her sleep and then never wakes up. And so it's a very like hooky one-line pitch, which is something again I'd love to see more of. We are always banging on about it as commissioning editors. We're always wanting books that we can really sum up in that memorable way, because it really helps us to build buzz internally and externally. So I'd love to see more high concept novels coming through like that. I think in the wider crime and thriller market, there's still quite a lot of cozy crime coming through as a result of the Richard Osman success. But it's an area that is sort of dominated by Richard Osman and now by Reverend Coles, which is published by Orion, which are both brilliant, but we're finding it harder to make other people cut through in quite the same way. But I hope that they will, because the cozy crime genre is quite a fun one. I'd love to find a really great cozy crime novel.
Yeah, totally. I think you've basically touched upon our next question, but I'll ask it anyway in case you have any other thoughts. We wanted to know what kinds of things you look for in a submission, and if there are any kind of standout examples of things that can be done to grab an editor's attention.
Yeah, so I think, as I mentioned, the Anna O acquisition recently was a big one. It was quite competitive. Well, it was very competitive, and I think part of the reason everybody wanted it was because it was such an amazing concept, an amazing proposition, and that's something we're always keen on. And I think sometimes authors don't necessarily know exactly what we mean by that. But one tip I always say is if you look at the Sunday Times lists that are published in the paper, there'll always be a sort of one-liner from the Times explaining what the book is about, and that's essentially the hook. And if when I'm reading a novel, I can't find a way to hook a reader in, then it will give me pause for thought. So if I can't work out what the proposition is, I'm probably not the right editor for the novel. And to be clear, this is very much commercial fiction I'm talking about. You have more leeway in literary fiction, but in the area that I work in, the proposition is really hitting. And then I think the other things that stand out are if there is a sort of really compelling setting often really stands out to me. So when I bought The Chalet, which I mentioned earlier, I just immediately loved it and put it to the top of my pile because I loved the idea of an isolated chalet in the middle of the French Alps in the snow and this group of friends, and it kind of just sold itself. And then it did sell, which was great. And with that one as well, I remember the agent wrote like an amazing pitch letter, and that was what made me read it so quickly, was partly the agent's pitch. So I think having a really great agent who can do that for you is really quite essential in more traditional publishing. And I think as well, I'm always looking for something that feels different to what I currently have, because like I said, we do have quite limited slots and we can only take on a certain amount of authors and we don't want them to compete with each other too much. So if I'm looking for a psychological thriller, I'm looking for something that does something different to the ones I already have, whether that's something about the setting, whether that's a really standout character, whether that's a theme that hasn't been covered before, or whether it's something to do with the author, then, there always needs to be something that sets it apart from what I currently have, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, I think they're really useful tips. For any aspiring authors out there, what is the most annoying thing that can be done when submitting?
I think following the instructions is really important because I mean, it depends which way you're going about it. So if you're coming through traditional publisher, most of what we get is through agents. So they should, that they know us as editors. So there's not so much that. But I think if you're submitting directly yourself, if there are sort of instructions from the publisher, from the agency, then do try and follow them, just because it makes people's lives easier. And because we're dealing with sort of hundreds of submissions all the time, you want to just, I guess, play by the rules in that way. And I know that it can be frustrating because sometimes you're like, oh, can you just read it without worrying about all the PDF or the number of words? But I think just don't shoot yourself in the foot by not following those instructions. I think as well, it's just, I guess one like a silly thing that annoys me is like I had an email the other day which was addressed to Dear Sirs, which just annoyed me because I'm a woman. Like pretty much everyone in publishing is pretty female, and I just found that like very strange, and like the person had not taken any time to do the research. And I guess the other thing is just being prepared to think about what I've said in terms of the way you pitch your book. Like we do want it to be quite concise. We do want you to get to the heart of the matter, and we don't have time to read like very, very long emails or very, very long pitches. So take the time to sort of craft that and, get other people's opinions and have a look at how other people have done it. There's lots of information online about how to pitch your novel. But the vast majority of submissions are always always great. Like there's, I don't find it annoying. I love finding new writers, and I'm always looking for new writers. So don't worry too much. And I would also say try not to be too intimidated, because I know it can be intimidating looking at the industry and thinking, oh, who am I going to submit this book to? But actually, most people are really lovely and we genuinely want your story. So try not to let the sort of fancy websites put you off.
Yeah, I think that's really important as well, because you can just get a bit swallowed up into the idea that like there's these kind of huge like houses, and you're not really thinking about that there's someone actually behind the screen that really wants to read that. Yeah, thank you for that. That's really useful. What trends, you have touched on this a little bit, but we were wondering what trends are you seeing on the rise in fiction at the moment, whether that's crime or maybe something that you're finding like in your colleagues' work?
Yeah, I think literary fiction has been booming quite a lot in the last couple of years. So my colleagues at HarperCollins, at the Borough Press and Fourth Estate are the more literary imprints, and they've been getting a lot of really great submissions through that have become very competitive. So there's been sort of a lot of publishers wanting them. I think we're still seeing a lot of female-led books. So we had a lot of success with How to Kill Your Family by Bella Mackie, which is published by the Borough Press, and that features sort of female serial killer. And there's been a lot like that. Like I've had quite a lot that are sort of darkly comic, led by women, which are really good fun. But again, I've struggled to find something that doesn't sit too closely to the Bella Mackie. So that's an example of sort of where we need to prioritize her. And so then we need to think about what else we could take on in that space. But I definitely think that's coming through. There's a lot of rom-coms in our general fiction team. They're buying a lot of romantic comedies. Some of them are coming from the US. So we're buying from our US colleagues. Some of them have come through TikTok. BookTok is obviously like a huge influence. Like if you look at the Sunday Times this week, the top 3 titles are all from Colleen Hoover, which is really unprecedented. And it just shows like the power of that platform to influence readers. And it's still a platform that is growing so quickly and rapidly. And so we're still finding out like what are the best ways to work with TikTok and help our authors with TikTok. So I think that will be really interesting to watch over the next, few months and years. So yeah, I'd say that's quite a big trend. We're still looking for more diversity in terms of our authors. There has been a slight rise, I would say, in books that feature disabled characters or disabled protagonists, which is great, but I would love to see more of that and more like representation. And yeah, I still don't think the industry is anywhere near where it needs to be when it comes to diversity. But there is a little bit of an increase. And again, I think some of that is confidence, writers feeling that this is a place for them, this is an industry for them, no matter who they are, where they come from. Like we really want to make sure people do feel that way. And I know that they don't at the moment always. Other trends, I think, yeah, like I mentioned before, cozy crime is still having a bit of a moment. I think I don't know, I think it will be interesting to see whether we do get more sort of pandemic related fiction, because there was definitely a sort of spate last year of novels that touched on the pandemic or sort of turned it into an alternate reality. And again, for me, I didn't love those books because I just found it too close to home. But if the pandemic does come to an actual end rather than a sort of social end like we've had in the UK at the moment, then it'll be interesting to see if people start to write about it, after the event is sort of firmly over. But I can't imagine that it will probably be over in any time soon. So I think that will be really interesting to watch. If there is some sort of resolution, will people then start writing about it more?
Yeah, totally. This is quite a nice question. What is your favourite part about your job and the most challenging?
My favorite part is I think telling writers good news, basically. So if I sign up a debut writer, I love being able to sort of close that deal and tell them that their first book is going to be published, because it's just such a big moment. It feels like you're sort of helping make someone's dream come true, which is really lovely. And I think as a writer myself, like I know how much it can mean to someone to get that first novel. So that's a big part of it. And, being able to tell authors that they've hit the Sunday Times list, or telling them that we've got a really great retail slot for them, passing on good news really, and making the authors feel happy and having that connection with readers and getting strong reviews for a book that you've sort of worked on for years is really rewarding. The worst part, I would say, probably the opposite, like having to give bad news. Sometimes we do because it's quite a challenging market at the moment. And although I would love every book I publish to be a bestseller, like that doesn't always happen, and it's not always within our control. So having to tell an author that maybe their book hasn't sold that well, or that we can't do another book with them, something like that, that's always just a really tough part. And I think also the point I mentioned about not being able to control everything, that's quite challenging, because sometimes you'll put everything into a book and for whatever reason it won't connect with readers and it won't sell to the level that we want it to, and so that can feel really tough for everybody involved, and then having to pass on that information is always sad. But I do still think it should be passed on. Like, I really believe as an editor that authors should have transparency, and that we should, we're all part of the same team, and I don't believe in kind of withholding information as the publisher. So I think it's really important for an author, if you are looking for an editor or a publisher, you need somebody that you can be honest with, and that you can have honest conversations with, because it's your career and it's your future. And so I think, that piece is really important. Even if it's not good news, I would still prefer to tell the author.
Yeah, totally. And like, author care is just like exactly in the middle of everything that you're talking about. And you feel the good days and you feel the bad days just as much as the author would. And yeah, totally. Especially when you're the champion of that book, and it just feels like it really hurts you as much as the author.
It's really, but it can be really frustrating, and then sometimes there's things like, recently you probably have seen, there's a big issue going on with Waterstones because they changed their distribution system, and so a lot of the books that are published in August have not been stocked in the stores, and so that's just really heartbreaking, because it's not the author's fault, and especially authors that have gone through COVID and the bookshop closures. It's such bad timing and it's bad luck, and we try and work with Waterstones really closely, and I know Waterstones are trying to sort it out, but ultimately it means that those books are not going to sell as many copies. And for an author who's been waiting years to have their book published, and for us as well, who, we've brought it to market, it can be really frustrating. But I think the key is to trust in your editor and your publisher. And also, publishing is really a marathon, not a sprint. And another really nice part of the job actually is seeing an author who maybe hasn't been selling that well suddenly have a big hit. And I've seen that happen for authors, with their 6th book in their career, or like their 10th book. Or it doesn't always have to be the big shiny debut. It can be an author who's actually just spent like years building up and has some sales but not loads, and then suddenly something takes off. And that's kind of the magic of publishing. Sometimes it's never over.
Yeah, I was just about to ask that actually, because you kind of like sparked it in my brain, that I think a lot of people worry that like the day you have to kind of like hit the ground running. But I think it's really nice to know that you can start at any point. It doesn't matter like how old you are or how long you've been writing for, that it can happen for you at any point.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I know authors that have been published for the first time in their 60s and their 80s, and then authors that have been published in their 20s, 30s. And I do think if you look at the industry from the outside, it's easy to think, oh, well, because my book didn't sell for 6 figures at the Frankfurt Book Fair and I'm not 25 years old, like, I'm never going to make it. And that's just so not true. Like, honestly, I do not care how old an author is or what stage they're at, anything like that. Like, I just care about like a great story and an author that wants to commit to writing. I mean, they don't have to just write. People have day jobs, that's fine. But I just mean, wants to write seriously and wants to work with us as a publishing house to collaborate on their novel. And that can happen at any stage. And there are authors who, like Lucy Foley, for example, who has changed genre. So she wrote some historical novels with HarperCollins and then moved to write The Hunting Party, which became a huge success. And, authors' careers can really change. Or, you can get selected for a prize, or you win a book club, or there are loads of different factors, and that doesn't always have to be with your debut novel.
Yeah, thank you. That's really great. What is one piece of advice you would give to a writer about to embark on the submission process?
So I think do your research is a big one. So know who you're submitting to. Different agencies or different publishers have different genres that they specialize in, and they have different requirements. So it is worth, even though it sort of feels boring and you just want to get on with it, like, it is worth taking the time to do that research. Do have a think about where your book sits in the market and try and really hone that pitch. Really practice it, practice writing your synopsis, because although you might get an opportunity later in life to do something else, like with this particular book, and you want to get it right when you're pitching for that first time. So it is worth not rushing it too much. And secondly, just don't be disheartened, because rejection is definitely a part of it. My novel got rejected loads. Most of the authors I work with have had multiple rejections, even the ones that you wouldn't think had. And I think if you just like look behind the curtain, there's so many authors that look like overnight success stories that have actually been rejected multiple times. So you've got to kind of toughen up a little bit with that part of the process. And and not internalize the rejection, and make sure it doesn't put you off. Make sure you keep writing and keep submitting if it's something that you believe in. And even if your first book doesn't sell, write something else. I know lots of authors whose debuts didn't sell at all, as in didn't find a deal, and then their second ones did, or their third ones did, or however many. So it is really worth having that perseverance. And I know everyone sort of says don't give up, but it really is true. And if you do your research and you're a good writer, then I do believe that a lot of writers do find the right homes, and sometimes it's just a question of being a little bit patient.
Yeah. And how have you found it kind of being on both sides of the process? Do you find sometimes you can't turn off your editing brain, or are you
Yeah.
able to like do that?
Yeah, sometimes it's hard. So I've actually just got my edits from my editor for my fifth book, which is out next year. And that's been quite tough actually, because I was like, oh God, it's like so much work to do. But I try to like give myself the advice that I would give to my authors, which is that it's all for the best and they're on the same side as you. And sometimes it is just, you can't edit your own book. Like you need somebody else to look at it from an objective point of view. So yeah, I think it's really important to sort of know that that's part of the process and not be afraid of collaboration, because I think for writers it can be weird because you're writing on your own for so many months or whatever, you're kind of at home and it's just your story, and then when you share it with a publishing team there's suddenly so many people involved and there's so many different voices that want to say, so it is worth just sort of accepting that that's part of the process and seeing the good sides, as well as the sides that maybe feel like a bit difficult. But yeah, no, I love being able to do both, and I've met a lot of people that from being on both sides, but I've met a lot of authors who are now friends, and then authors that I work with, and so yeah, I really like being part of the industry.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And where can people find you? Websites or social media? Anything you'd like
Yeah.
to plug with anyone?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, which is Phoebe_A_Morgan. I'm on Instagram, which is Phoebe Ann Morgan, and I have a website which is phoebemorganauthor.com. So that might be quite a useful resource. I need to update it, so don't judge me because it's not that up to date. But there are a lot of kind of articles on there about the submission process, the contract process, how to pitch your book, how to get an agent. So yeah, it might be quite a useful resource for writers. And you can find my books on Amazon at the moment. And I have another one out next year, which will then be in the bookshops. So yeah, if you want to come find me, that would be great. And I'm always happy to answer questions about publishing or writing. So yeah, always feel free to DM me if you want more information.
Fantastic. That's really useful. And we'll link everything for everybody as well.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on.
No worries. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.